Today we're going to talk about one of Maven's infrared filters and a little bit about infrared photography in general. So if you've been curious about infrared landscape photography, an infrared filter like this for the end of your lens, this particular one is from Maven Filters, can be an inexpensive way to sort of try it out and see if you like it and play a little bit with it before you do a more expensive camera conversion or something like that. Now when I set out to create this video, I thought it'd be quick, just toss it on into the camera, take a few pictures, bring them back into Lightroom, give them a quick edit, and we'd be able to talk about infrared photography. But as I quickly learned, there's more nuances to infrared photography than I realized. So I actually delayed my video last week so I could sort of read a little more, learn a little more about infrared photography, so I could sort of provide a better overview of infrared photography in this video. So while I'm new to infrared photography, I think what I've picked up on in the past couple of weeks in playing with this filter will help people that are new to it and just wanting to put this filter on and get some results. I think it'll help them get through that process. So this video is sort of morphed from a strictly, let's talk about the Maven IR filters into let's do a high-level overview of infrared photography. We'll talk about these Maven filters. I take them out in the field, we get some infrared photos with them, and then we're going to bring them back into the office and we're going to put them in Lightroom, and we're going to do a quick black and white edit on one of these. Now, infrared landscape photography, as I've learned, there's a ton of information. Like I said, it's almost like starting over with photography with this. So I will link to some of the resources I've been using down in the video description below. So if after watching this video, you're like, you know, I am interested, I want to learn a little more, I'll link to some websites down below that I found especially useful as I started trying to figure this out, what the nuances are. And those websites will dig in a little deeper than what we're going to hit in this video. But I think if you watch this video, you'll have a good idea about what this filter is about, if it's interesting to you, and hopefully get you started with at least being able to go out, get some early results, and sort of figure out if this is a genre of photography that you want to pursue. So why would you want to consider even dabbling in this genre of photography, infrared landscape photography? And really, for me, it can potentially allow me to expand my shooting hours. So with visible light photography, the normal photography we're used to with our normal cameras, we really are looking for that softer light. We're looking for that early morning light. We're looking for that late evening light. And unless it's an overcast day, if it's a bright sunny day, you feel like there's probably not a whole lot I can do. Maybe I can go find some spots of shade and get some small scenes in there. Maybe I can do some high contrast black and white photography or something like that. But where infrared excels is it works really well in that bright light. It really gives you these very high contrast images and gives you a lot of options to sort of extend those shooting hours. So you may be wondering how infrared photography helps with that. Well, this infrared filter, what it does is it's filtering out certain wavelengths of light. And visible light sits in a certain wavelength range, and it's sitting here. If you put this filter on, this blocks those wavelengths so it doesn't get into your filter, and you start to only see the infrared light. The infrared light plays very well in these high contrast, bright sunny scenes. As you're going to see a little later in this video, when I took this out to play with it, I was actually looking forward to a very bright sunny day. In fact, I actually recorded the segment sooner than I wanted to because I saw in the forecast it was going to be bright and sunny, whereas a good chunk of the rest of the week was going to be sort of overcast. And I wanted those bright sunny conditions to really maximize what this filter could do. So what you do is you put it on and it's filtering out that visible light and only letting the infrared light come through. Now, infrared filters are measured in various strengths. It's filtering at different sets of wavelengths. This particular one is the Maven IR 720. So it's filtering out any wavelength below 720 nanometers. What that means in the world of infrared photography is some visible light is coming through, but not a lot, just a little bit. You'll get hints of color. You'll get a little bit of color in there. So if you're into the color infrared photography, you get just a little bit of color in there. Works really well for black and white photography. It's essentially what you'd call the standard infrared photography filter. A lot of times if you're going to start with infrared photography, you're going to be getting in a 720 filter, whether it's a camera conversion or whether it's a filter, you're going to start here most times. Now, if you find yourself after playing with this that you're more into colors in your infrared photos and you want to play with those false colors and color swaps and things like that, you would want to let more visible light into your camera. So you'd get a different strength filter, a filter that filters out a different set of wavelengths. So for example, you might go down to a 670 nanometer filter, which is going to let a little more visible light in. Or maybe you'll drop all the way down to a 590 nanometer filter, which lets even more visible light in. So as you move that way, as you go from a 720 down to like that 590, you're letting more visible light in, which gives you more option if you want those really pops of color and freaky colors and things like that. That's the direction you want to go. In this particular video, I'm going to focus in on the black and white infrared photography for a couple of reasons. It's a little easier, fewer things to cover in the timeline of this video. And two, I'm a sucker for black and white anyways, so playing with this infrared black and white just sort of really falls into where I found the most interest to it. The colors, they're cool, they're neat, it's like, oh wow. But long term, I feel like the black and white infrared is more my style, more I would go. So that's what we're going to focus on in this video. Meaning if I really wanted to dive into it and really fully lean into the black and white aspect, I would probably want an IR 830 filter, which is coming up in Maven's Wave 3 Kickstarter. They're releasing another infrared filter. This 720 was in their Wave 2 Kickstarter, and then Wave 3 has an 830 nanometer filter, and that eliminates almost all visible light, which means you're really going to be in that high contrast black and white infrared photography. So anyways, when you're looking for filters, that's what it means. The different levels of nanometers, 720, 830, 590, it's talking about how much visible light is getting in here. This particular one, again, is an IR 720, which means it's letting some visible light through, but not as much as one of the lower ones. Now, before we continue on talking more about the filters and some of the nuances to them, I do want to acknowledge that there's another way to do infrared photography. And if you find yourself intrigued by the genre after playing with a filter, you're probably going to find yourself looking at doing a infrared camera conversion. And there's a couple different ways to do this. And there's a couple sites out there that sort of walk you through it. Essentially what you do is you can take an older camera or even buy one for it, and you send it off to them, and they do a conversion to your sensor to make it more sensitive to infrared light. And it really helps remove a lot of the nuances that we're going to talk about with this filter. When you use this filter, because the camera's not really tuned to infrared, there's a couple nuances that's we're going to talk about here in just a few. And some of those nuances can be a little bit annoying. So if you're looking to do this all the time or have it just be a little easier or something that you're going to pursue, you're probably going to end up looking at a camera conversion. Like I said, I'll link to a couple sites down in the description below that do these camera conversions. And both of the sites I'm going to link to have really great explaining what's happening to your camera, what's going on, what they can do, and the difference between an infrared conversion and a full spectrum conversion. And again, it's a whole little world, and I just don't want to go completely into that world because I want to focus on the lens filters. But be aware, if you really get into this, you're probably going to be looking at doing a camera conversion at some point in your future. Again, links in the description below. Okay, back to infrared lens filters, which is what we're going to talk about for the rest of this video. Let's first just talk a little bit about the Maven filters. I've done numerous videos on Maven filter products. This particular filter, and the one I've been playing with, is the IR 720. Again, it's filtering 720 nanometers of light and below out. So it's only letting wavelengths that are above 720, which, like I mentioned earlier, that's sort of the standard infrared filter. If you're just getting started, this is probably the filter you're going to want to go with because it lets you get a little bit of visible light in there to play with the cool colors and do the interesting things like that, while it also lends itself well to black and white photography. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. You can sample both, and if you decide you lean one way or the other, you're probably going to want to go to a filter that doesn't filter out as much visible light, go a little lower, so like a 590 filter or a 670 nanometer filter. Those will both let in more visible light, give you more leeway with the color if you want to play with it. Maven does not currently have one of those filters out right now, but in Wave 3, they are coming out with an 830 nanometer filter, which lends itself well to the type of photography I seem to be gravitating towards, which is the black and white infrared photography. Now, I don't have the 830 nanometer filter, but I'm confident that Maven will release a quality, excellent product. And like I said, I have been able to play with the 720 now for a little bit. And true to Maven, it just works as advertised, and it's a great little filter. Like all Maven filters, it's magnetic, so it just pops right on there. Nice on and off, which is handy when it comes to some of the nuances here in a little bit. But it pops off and on there. It is sort of a dark silver, dark gray with a red squiggle line around it to sort of indicate that it's an infrared filter. Again, it's filtering wavelengths. So you get the little squiggle, represents a wavelength, and that's the filter. And it works like any lens filter, like an ND filter or polarizing filter, in that you just put it on the end of the lens, and it does the filtering from there. So, like I said, I've had it out several times now. It's worked great. No problems with it. And again, typical Maven quality. Like I said, I'm sort of excited about the 830 nanometer filter now that I've been playing with this one, because since I gravitate towards that black and white, I think that 830 could be real interesting for me to play with. Now, before I talk about my experience with this filter out in the field, let's talk about some of the nuances of infrared lens filters. So while an infrared lens filter does make it much easier to experiment with infrared landscape photography than doing a full camera conversion to find out if you like it, there are some nuances before you just sort of toss this filter on and start using it. In fact, when I shared some of my Instagram stories that I was playing with this filter, I actually had a couple people message me and say, wow, my first experience with it was not that great. And a lot of it's just due to how these nuances work. And it's not specific to Maven lens filters. It's any infrared lens filter, whatever brand it may be. You need to be aware of some of these things that to consider before you head out and start playing with it. And the first of which is long exposures. Using one of these filters greatly increases the amount of exposure time that you need. For example, when I took this out to the local metro park to play, I timed it based on what I learned in the backyard to be a bright sunny day because I knew it was going to take a very long exposure even on a bright sunny day. For example, the day I was out, which you'll see later, was 25-second exposures, 30-second exposures to get the exposure settings that I needed to get a properly exposed image. They were long exposure times. Even when I was at home playing with it in the backyard, I would play at the ISO to try to speed that shutter speed up. And I would move the ISO up, ISO 800, ISO 1200, ISO 3200. And I was still hitting multiple second long exposure times to do that. So, and think about it. What's this filter doing? It's filtering out visible light. It's filtering out anything below the filter strength of light. So in this particular case, this is filtering out wavelengths of light below 720 nanometers, which, as I mentioned earlier, means it's letting some visible light in, but it's predominantly infrared light coming through. Well, think about your camera. It's built to handle and expose for visible light. So if I'm filtering that all out, this is starting to act very much like an ND filter to increase those shutter speeds. So keep that in mind. If you're playing with this with a lens filter, your exposure time is going to be long. You're going to need a tripod. You're going to want those bright and sunny days. But it expands the amount of time I can shoot using infrared filters because that bright sunny part of the day is actually when these excel and it lets me get some really cool images out of it. So keep that in mind. Long exposure times. That's normal when you're using an infrared lens filter like this. Now, focus shifts is something to keep in mind. This is a bigger problem on DSLRs where you've got the mirror because it's relying on visible light to get that focus. And if you don't have that, this filter can really confuse it and alter your focusing. Now, I actually find myself even on mirrorless where it's actually sort of you're getting the image on the sensor and it's being able to do the focusing there. I still sort of treat it like it really wasn't focusing super well. And I don't know if that was just the conditions I was in or if I just need more time with it. But what I would do is I would get my focus without the filter on and I would make sure I had focus. And I use back button focus. So once it's set, it was fine as long as I didn't refocus. So I would get it with the filter off. I'd get my composition. And then I would put the filter on and then take the shot without refocusing. And that's what I was doing for most of the time. Part of it was just because I felt like I could see the focus. And if I was getting things in focus better without the filter on, technically the mirrorless, I believe, should have been able to handle autofocus since it's not having to be calibrated like a DSLR would be. But I was finding myself focusing frequently without the filter on and then putting the filter on without refocusing to get it. So just keep in mind, if you're getting any kind of soft images or things like that, you might want to do the focusing without the filter. Then don't refocus or anything, put the filter on and take the shot. If you're using a DSLR, that's pretty much what you're definitely going to want to do. Another thing with an infrared filter is we're talking about different wavelengths of light than we're used to working with. We're used to that visible spectrum where the wavelength is a little shorter. One of the things we know is shooting in visible light is diffraction, right? If we get too high of an aperture, f16, f22, things like that, those wavelengths of light start to bounce through there and start to diffract, causing a little bit of softness in your image. Well, if this filter, we're actually filtering out those shorter wavelengths of light, and we're trying to get those longer wavelengths of light that the IR spectrum is in. Those longer wavelengths of light are more sensitive to diffraction, so your aperture, you can actually start to see that diffraction sooner than you might with visible light. So if you're used to, say, shooting at f11 all the time because you're like, oh, this works good for my visible light, you could start to see the hints of diffraction at f11 when using an infrared filter. So when I was doing my photography with this filter, I tried to shoot it at like f5.6, f8, and try to stick in that range, just being aware that because they're longer wavelengths of light coming through, hitting that small aperture, they're more susceptible to diffraction a little earlier than we might be used to. So keep that in mind if you're finding that your images are a little soft or something like that. White balance is just out of control with an infrared image. As you're going to see from the field work and even the images that we first pull into Lightroom, it doesn't really matter what I set my white balance to. I can't actually set it cool enough on here. I can't set it far enough down to matter, you get this very red image. The white balance is just off. So it's super helpful to shoot in RAW because you're pretty much going to have to go fix that white balance, especially if you're shooting in color with it. You're going to need to fix that white balance. So when you first put this filter on, like I said, you'll see in the field video, the whole back of the screen, it turns red. It's got this like not even just warm, it's red. It's like what you would think infrared would look like. It's red. So really, once you pull those images in to your post-processing software, you're going to need to fix that white balance again. So you want to shoot in RAW when using an infrared filter or something like that, because you're going to have to make some pretty severe corrections to your white balance. And I have another note on that coming up. And finally, viewfinder challenges. The mirrorless actually handles it pretty well. It does it pretty well with ND filters. It pretty much compensates for the reduction in light. When I was playing with this, when I was doing video where I had no filter on, put the filter on, it took a few seconds for it to adjust, but it would fix the exposure if I was in one of the auto modes so that I could see to compose and anything like that. So just keep that in mind. The mirrorless handles it pretty well because they're sort of what you see in the LCD or the viewfinder is what you get. It's showing you the actual lighting conditions. A DSLR camera a lot of times isn't going to be able to show you that. So again, it's similar to the focus piece. What you're going to want to do is if you're struggling to see the back, or maybe you just, and maybe that's it. Maybe even though you can see it, you're just struggling to compose. It's just not making sense to you. You may want to do your composition without the filter on. Make sure you have it all set. Make sure you've got that focus point set, and then put the filter on, especially if it's confusing you, even if the camera is handling it. On a camera that just blacks out the viewfinder because it can't handle that infrared light, then you're going to want to compose again without the filter, add it on once you've got your composition, and go from there. And finally, when it comes to post-processing these infrared images, there's the white balance issue we talked about. And so, for example, I use Lightroom for a lot of my editing. And for these infrared images, it actually can't get cool enough to fix the white balance. So I actually have to use, I'll link to where I got it down below, but I use an infrared camera profile to help me fix that and get it into a range that I want in order to be able to fix it. So there's that. And then if you're doing colors, a lot of people you're going to need to do, it comes in with sort of false color, and you have to sort of do a color channel swap in order to get it to look the way you want. So just be aware, even your post-processing of these images change a bit. Now I'm going to gloss over the color part of the editing because I found myself leaning more towards the black and white infrared, but just be aware your post-processing is going to change a bit because of editing these infrared images. So anyways, those are the nuances. Like I said, those nuances are not specific to Maven. It's not because, oh, I got a Maven filter, so I have these problems. These are common nuances to using any brand infrared lens filter. It's just one of the factors of using it. If you want to move away from some of these problems because you find yourself really into this infrared photography, then again, that's where you're going to find yourself looking at a camera conversion I talked about earlier in this video. So with that, let's talk about using this out in the field. So like I said, when I first started playing with this filter, I initially started in my backyard. And that was where I very quickly learned, okay, I need to do a little more reading about this, figure out how it works, make sure I know how to post-process an image, just with photographing stuff in my backyard. Once I sort of got the hang of it, I had this particular spot in mind at a local metro park, and they moved an old fire tower into this park. And I think it's a pretty cool feature. And I don't usually photograph hand-to-man objects in my photos. Every once in a while, I'll put a bridge in. But for some reason, it's what I wanted in this picture. And I think what I was thinking of is you've got the fire tower there above the green. Again, infrared really makes green pop. It really shows as bright, whereas waters and skies get all dark to give you that contrast effect. That's what the infrared light is doing. So I was picturing this fire tower, which would be dark against a sky, hopefully a little bit of clouds in it so I could get some white or some contrast up in the sky. And then the green coming out from underneath of it, which would show nice and bright on the infrared in that black and white image. So that's what I pictured. And so I headed out with the family to the Metro Park, and I set up my first shot of the fire tower, and I did a few shots there. Then I relocated to another composition I felt was a little bit stronger, and that's sort of the one we'll focus on, is that second spot. I felt a little better about it. Again, fire tower sitting there, sky in the background, and I did a couple shots. I did some where you could see the sort of the meadow in front of me, and I did some that were zoomed in a little more. Again, I was shooting this for the Nikon Z5 II 24 to 120 millimeter lens, and I did, like I said, I did a couple wider scenes and a couple where I really just sort of highlighted the fire tower against the sky as a backdrop. Again, I was using a tripod because I knew it was going to be a long exposure even in this bright sunny day, and sure enough, I got all set up and I'm up there. And again, my exposure times, I want to say, were right around 25 seconds. And it was, I think I was there at like 3 in the afternoon. So I was out like midday, harsh sun. And at ISO, I was probably ISO 100, ISO 200, still 25-second long exposure. So you got to keep that in mind. Now, I mentioned the focus thing. Like I said, I think technically I can focus with the mirrorless because of the way its focusing system works, but I wasn't feeling super confident because the back of the screen, it's this red image, super, super, super warm. It's almost like you've got warm light mode on the camera or something like that when you have the filter on. So what I was doing is I would take the filter off, I would compose my shot, and I would get my focus point, and I would make sure I had focus without the filter. Once I had the composition and I had my focus point, then I would put the filter on and I would take my shot. And that's pretty much how my process worked. If I moved or recomposed or anything like that, I'd pop the filter off, I would compose, re-get my focus point, and put the filter on, take the shot. Couple notes, it was breezy that day, so you got to really embrace that when you're using this particular filter because you're doing these long exposures. The odds of you getting the leaves or the grasses not blowing is just, it's not going to happen very often. It certainly wasn't happening on the afternoon I was there. And as we see some of these images I pull off of here, the clouds were moving too. So I'm using a 25-second exposure. You're going to see those clouds move and soften. Now, I think it added to the effect. I like that soft look of clouds. It gives them just a little bit of interest. But you're really going to have to lean into the fact that the tree leaves are going to move, the grasses are going to move, so you're going to get a little bit of fuzziness. Sort of another reason I wanted to photograph the fire tower, even though I don't normally photograph those types of objects, is because I knew it would stay still. So in this big long exposure, it'll be sharp and crisp, and other pieces will go soft compared with the high contrast of this black and white infrared image I was picturing in my head. Just sort of all came together and go from there. So like I said, I spent, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes out there playing with different compositions and taking shots. And I was pretty happy with what I walked away with once I was done out there. And then I immediately brought those images home and pulled them into Lightroom. And so let's take a look in Lightroom and let's go through editing one of these images pretty quickly. Like I said, I don't want this to be an editing video, but I just sort of want to let you see how it looks like when it comes into Lightroom, what I do to sort of fix it. Fix it might not be the right word, but I just sort of want you to see what it looks like when the image comes into the Lightroom as a raw file and some of the heavy swings I have to do to get it to sort of where I want. So let's take a look in Lightroom. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I've pulled in images from the second spot I set up at. It's the one I like the most. Now, you can see here, this is the images I took. This is where I was getting my composition, where I was getting my focus. I would do that without the filter. Then I would put the filter on, and this is what I got. Now, I'm going to edit these in black and white, but if you're doing any kind of color photography, you're going to have to fix white balance, and there's a lot of information about how to do that in Lightroom. And I am going to link to a really good article down below that talks about how to set white balance in Lightroom, and even has some custom camera profiles that you can use to sort of give you a head start because of some of the nuances of setting that white balance in Lightroom and the fact that Lightroom won't let you actually get cool enough with its default sliders. You have to use a special profile to do it. I wouldn't do it justice here in this video, and I'm going to focus on the black and white side of things, but I will link to that in the description down below. So if you're interested in the color editing of this, you're going to want to start there to sort of start to bring this image into shape. So here I am here. Let's go ahead and convert this. I'm not going to take it into Silver FX like I might normally. I'm going to try to keep this all here in Lightroom, but I just pop it in black and white. As you can see, we already got some of this contrast. For me, the infrared photography, I sort of want it to be pretty contrasty. That's just sort of how it feels to me, at least this particular scene, because I got the sky that's dark, and I got the fire tower that's dark, the foliage is bright and green. That's what the infrared's doing. It bounces off of that, gives you that super bright, and then the clouds get super cool because it's got some dark and some brights. So first, we're going to take a look at the histogram up there. We're just going to bump up the exposure a little bit, bring that contrast in just with the general contrast slider. We're going to pull the highlights back a touch. I'm going to bring the whites up just a little more. Make those dark blacks a little blacker. I'm going to soften the clarity just a little bit for the cloud's sake. But you can see, because it's such a long exposure, we've already got some clouds that are fairly soft. Come down here, the tone curve. Again, we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring this over, get those whites a little brighter. Those darks a little darker. Bring this over. We're going to just do a classic S-curve here. We brought the shadows down, bring the highlights up. I'm going to straighten this image. Again, this is shot at 24-120. We're going to crop it just a bit because that foreground was a little too much, so we're going to crop it in there like that. I'm just going to try a radial gradient because I want the fire tower to be just a little bit more. We're going to invert that. And then we're going to bring the highlights down on stuff outside. And probably bring a linear gradient up, add another mask. That foreground's pretty overwhelming. I really want more emphasis going on the tower and up in the sky. And I inverted this mask, so I was affecting everything out, but let's go ahead. We're going to invert this mask, duplicate and invert again. So now I've got the fire tower selected. And I'm just going to put even more contrast in our fire tower. So we're going to bring those blacks down just a little more, bring those whites up. Again, what I'm trying to do is just make that fire tower pop just a little bit more. Again, that is a super fast edit, but you can sort of see what kind of fun you can get into. Make sure I got my lens corrections on there. But you can sort of see this is what it came in as, converted to black and white, and then I just went for the contrasty look. Now I have another one over here where I did a zoomed in one. Again, this is my shot that I took where I got my composition, got my focus, put the filter on, and I've already sort of edited this one. I'm real happy with how this one came out. I got that look I was looking for, the fire tower popping against the clouds and things like that. But between these two images, you can see it was started as a super bright sunny day. Ordinarily would not consider this a great time to be out practicing your landscape photography necessarily, unless you were sort of shooting out some shades, some shadows, or something like that. Put on an infrared filter, and suddenly we got some fun options to play with. Like I said, it was a quick outing. Same with this. This is just sort of, okay. But when you get that infrared and that soft cloud behind it, I'm really pleased with that particular image for sure. But as you can see, gives you some opportunities to play with. I found it intriguing. I'm looking forward to using this filter some more. Yep, let's wrap this video up. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Like I said, we crammed a lot of information in here. Everything from these high-level look at infrared landscape photography, talking about specifically this Maven IR 720 filter, which I've been playing with for a little bit, as well as the IR 830 filter that's coming out in Wave 3. So if you're looking to play with some infrared photography and this looks interesting to you, something fun to experiment with, something to maybe expand the amount of time you can photograph in a summer day, these are fun little filters to play with. Like I said, I only have the 720 right here, and I'm really, over the past couple weeks, I've really enjoyed playing with it, learning the nuances. I think there's a lot more fun to be had with it. I was really happy with that second fire tower picture. I think it came out really neat, just sort of what I was looking for, and I'm looking forward to being able to play with this some more. In fact, I started to regret not playing with this more out in New River Gorge. When I did my scouting trip to New River Gorge, I spent a lot of time driving to places that were not in the greatest parts of the day, and the light was pretty harsh. But thinking back, wow, I really wish I'd thought to break this filter out, because I think it would let me create some really cool scenes. Like I said, I scouted Sandstone Falls when I was out there, and I didn't even take my camera out because I'm like, it's bright sun, it's bright midday, I'm just not going to get the picture I'm happy with. I'm more curious about, if I'm here at an ideal time, how do I quickly get to a composition I want? So I was scouting out compositions. But if I'd have taken this filter and done some shots, I think I could have come away with some really cool stuff. And there were several spots like that. So I'm sort of kicking myself for not using this filter more when I was in New River Gorge. I think it really would have opened up a lot of opportunity. And I probably could have walked away with some even more images, even though I spent a good chunk of time scouting during the less than ideal parts of day. So anyways, more cool stuff from Maven Filters. I'm super glad I got to play with this. Like I said, the 720 nanometer filter is already out. You will be able to get it as part of the Wave 3 Kickstarter, because they're putting the earlier filters along with that in that Kickstarter. And they're also releasing the IR 830 in that Kickstarter. And that may be the one I'm looking to pick up, since I find myself gravitating towards the black and white side of infrared photography. Anyways, I hope you found the video helpful. Don't forget to check out Maven's Kickstarter. I will link to a couple other Maven videos I've done, including one on the LPL plus diffusion filter that's going to be part of the Wave 3. Be sure to check those out, and thanks for watching.